some publication about this project. I just only say a few words that Esalen Institute in the USA was the epicenter of the emerging human potential movement and absorbed and collected together those interested in transcending the boundaries between the physical and the spiritual, body and mind, man and nature, and in 1970s initiated a pioneering project of political and cultural engagement, cultural exchange program with the USA, and in one of his interviews, the founder of Esalen, Martin Murphy, explained, "My theory is that the Soviet Union has more people gifted in the expression of occult powers like telekinesis than any other nation. The stupendous Russian energy for mysteries is bound to find its expression in a return of the oppressed. Like a jack in the box, these energies spring up in all kinds of ways. I come to believe that the Soviet Union is erupting with these energies." But in my presentation now, I'll tell you only about the part of this exchange related to the late Soviet home birth movement. And it's wondering that the American human potential movement has a much stronger, more complex, and more multi-faceted effect on Russian, late Soviet and Russian home birth movement than the Western midwifery movement, based on the concept of women's reproduction rights and human rights in the home. Yes. I'll tell you about one more strange, ambitious, and controversial phenomenon of the late Soviet history, inspired by the ideas of a superhuman being. In my case, it is about a baby dolphin possessing paranormal abilities and living in the sea with dolphins. These ideas were inspired by a charismatic teacher and psychic Igor Tchaikovsky and implemented by enthusiastic parents, members of the wide grassroots movement for a healthy lifestyle and home birth that arose in the late Soviet Union and reached its peak of popularity during the perestroika years. The hope for the emergence of new children, sensitive or psychics, who could radically change the future world, was also associated with the new practices of out-of-hospital water birth. As one of my respondents said, I think that the value of these practices is that they create the possibility of the arrival of new souls, that is, the incarnation, the birth of people with a different type of consciousness. The myth about Tchaikovsky began to form in early 1970s with several publications in the popular magazines about his daughter Veta, who was born premature but grew up healthy and strong thanks to the aquatic workouts which were conducted by his father in the early 1960s. In fact, Veta spent many hours in water where she ate, slept, dug for toys, and watched film strips projected onto the pool walls. This special training system was called aquaculture and included intensive training of future parents, pregnant women, swimming, diving, gymnastics, and cold strengthening in the ice pools, giving birth in the water, ideally in the sea, baby yoga, a kind of manual neonatal therapy, infant swimming and diving from the first day of life, and metaphysical connection with dolphins. It was one of the main ideas of this program. Tchaikovsky worked, he was a research fellow, and he worked in the laboratory of the biomechanics of sports in the All Union Scientific Research Institute of Physical Culture and Sports in the 70s and early 80s. And he conducted various experiments with land insects, birds, and animals, and found that the fear of water could be overcome through training. which was especially effective for animal newborns, as he thought. And these ideas were supported by different scientists, officials, artists, and journalists. For example, physiologist Professor Shatsky, the then director of this Institute of Physical Culture, Professor Ratov, academician Kazanachev, chairman of the USSR Swimming Federation, Zakhary Firsov, and many others. And also these ideas of water babies by Tchaikovsky became well known in the West. First of all, due to the book by Swedish journalist Erik Tidenblad, who visited Tchaikovsky and then published in 1982 his book about his water boat training and water babies training, and many Western people and ordinary people were inspired by these ideas, and they wanted to give birth for their children in water, and some of them tried to go to the Soviet Union and to find Tchaikovsky and give birth to their children by his help. And one of these stories was written by American woman Anna Costa and published in your interesting blog about late Soviet New Age. She tried to find Tchaikovsky in Petersburg, and then she gave birth to her child by herself and the help of her husband, because they couldn't find Tchaikovsky. But then they met him in Moscow, and he conducted water workouts with their newborn son. And Tchaikovsky also gained fame as a psychic healer and participated in various public events. For example, with Juna, famous Soviet extrasense, and others demonstrated his paranormal abilities. Tchaikovsky was a single leader with his Christ ideas, but these ideas were implemented among enthusiastic parents, and there was a broad grassroots movement for healthy lifestyle in the Soviet Union in 1970s and 1980s. And there were different grassroots clubs, and one of them was the famous Health Family Club, which united parents, alternative parents who practiced psychic healing and different esoteric practices, yoga and naturopathy, and different non-medical practices for health. The founders of this club, Alexander Gurevich and Aron Sirkin, they practiced yoga, and they were associated with Cosmos, well-known Cosmos Yoga Club. But then they decided to start work with little children, and they founded this club for families, which met in Gorky Park in 1980s. And it is this club where many important figures of the international New Age movement visited, such as John Levy, Linda Tennyson-Jones, and others. And there was a very extensive exchange of ideas, books, and practices. In this milieu, this special training for babies for aquaculture was widely implemented. And on these photos, you may see Tchaikovsky and in 1980s in Moscow Family Club, and his trainings with little children. So my ideas, what questions I try to raise on this material are what are the impacts, differences, and intersectionality of these two different milieux, Western New Age and so-called late Soviet esotericism. We see that there are some fields of interconnection, but there also are differences in these fields. How connected and intervened these parts of Western Age as human potential movement, interspecies communication, first of all, human-dolphin communication, ideas of holistic healing, spiritual midwifery, which was very important for Russian spiritual midwives, as they call themselves, and transpersonal psychology by Stanisław Grof, and his idea of perinatal matrices, which this teaching was also very important for Russian home birth movement, and how these ideas how they influenced and in what way, and on Soviet ideas about hidden human reserves, скрытый человеческий потенциал, and the teaching of anthromaximology by Vladimir Kuznetsov. It's an interesting fact that Vladimir Kuznetsov, the author of anthromaximology, was a senior research colleague of Tchaikovsky in this Institute of Physical Culture and Sports, and he supported Tchaikovsky, who could not by himself wrote any paper, any text. All of his followers said that he was a kind of human dolphin, so it was even difficult for him to explain his words, not about reading. So as we could understand, many people helped him in his writings when he tried to defend his PhD thesis. He failed, but it's interesting to know that there was such attempt. So anthromaximology has very the idea very near to the human potential movement. It's an attempt to find some optimal of these human possibilities. On the example of sportsmen, Olympic sportsmen, and their during their trainings. Well, I'll just yes. You may see some data which I use in my research, personal archives of the members of this movement, and interviews of the most important figures of this movement. Some is that Almanach Aqua, which was published in late 80s. There were a lot of publications in Soviet press and popular science journals such as Техника молодежи, Смена, Вокруг света, and also publications in the Western press, and I was lucky to find some published and all unpublished memoirs of Western journalists and New Ages. First of all, by Estelle Meyers, Linda Templeton-Jones, and some others. And I also based on some literature which exists. And first of all, it is PhD dissertation by Ekaterina Belousova, defended in Rice University, and it's based on her interviews with such not only of Tchaikovsky's foes, but also on famous Western ages such as Michael Murphy and others. Well, I just want to present you some photos of the most prominent New Age figures, and to so you could see this connections with Russian founders movement. For example, such famous New Ager and one of the key figures of the international New Age and mystical approaches to dolphins as John Lilly visited Tchaikovsky himself and Moscow Health Club, and you can see here publication in Вечерняя Москва dedicated to this visit. It's hardly to say how or what kind of reader was Tchaikovsky, but I know due to his follows, and first of all his former secretary Vladimir Bagriansky, that Tchaikovsky had a large library, home library, and he had this book of, by John Lilly, his famous book about man and dolphin. But it's hardly to say how much he relied on this book, where we could find such ideas in the book by John Lilly, that over the next 10-20 years, humanity will establish communication with representatives of other species, with some other creatures, perhaps not terrestrial, most like marine, but most likely possessing a high level of mental development or even intelligence. And there are some memoirs by John Lilly after his visit of Tchaikovsky and his water babies. He was impressed with the abilities of water babies and said, I made sure that Tchaikovsky's children worked, they have exceptional contacts with dolphins, and they understand each other through intuition. They already know how to sleep in water and find food in water, and they're able to leave the ocean if dolphins take them into their flock. So he discusses the ideas of Tchaikovsky, which were published in different Russian scientific popular journals, and it is those ideas that Tchaikovsky explained every time when he was asked about his aquaculture method. And Lilly also linked Tchaikovsky's method with his ideas about a new human-dolphin communication and the ideas that some former delphiniums will appear, a creature that combines the best qualities of two species. The second prominent New Ager and another iconic figure in the studies of human-dolphin communication was Jacques Mayol. A famous French free-diver and hero of the Big Blue Lagoon film by Luc Besson. He was authoring the book Homo Delphinius, The Dolphin Within Man, in 1979, and we know that this book was also in the library of Tchaikovsky before it was translated, even in English or in Russian. Tchaikovsky had the first edition of this book in Italian, and one of his fellows knew Italian, so he could had the possibility to translate something from this book. And Mayol visited the Soviet Union twice, in 1971 and 1982, and both times he took part in the Travelers Club TV show, which was very popular among the Soviet audience. And during the second program, Mayol, without naming Tchaikovsky, talked about the water babies he saw in Moscow. We saw here kids of 3-4 years old who felt like fish in water. They had happy eyes, they laughed merrily. We have seen that swimming was a pleasure for them. We saw here the implementation of an approach to bringing people capable of penetrating the depths of the ocean without harming it. So he found the continuation of his own ideas in this work out by Tchaikovsky. And Mayol spoke intensively about Tchaikovsky and his experience in the West, and that became the second source after Sitchinblad's book on the Western myth of the Russian dolphin man, as he called him. For example, Michel Arden, a French obstetrician and well-known natural childbirth enthusiast, said that he first heard about the amazing Russian doctor who takes deliveries in water from Jacques Mayol in the late 1970s. But few years later, then received a postcard from Moscow signed by Mayol and Tchaikovsky, who turned out to be not a doctor, but a swimming instructor. Mayol said about him as a famous Russian doctor. Well, the next very interesting figure of my presentation is Australian New Ager, Estelle Meyers. In one of his, Igor Tchaikovsky in 1982 finished one of his public presentations by the words, "The psychics from New Zealand said that the dolphins gave their permission for the ocean childbirth." And people were highly impressed by these words, but he met real people. First of all, Estelle Meyers, the founder of the Rainbow Dolphin Center in New Zealand. Meyers also learned about Tchaikovsky and his experiments with vertebrates from Jacques Mayol, and as she wrote, "I was totally fired up as the figment of my imagination had turned into reality." Early while meditating, she had the idea that the water babies would be the peacemakers of the future. So she also finds some connections of her ideas in Igor Tchaikovsky method, and she visited Moscow and Moscow Health Club, and she also had an experience of swimming in the ice hole in excursion site. It was such kind of initiation. All newcomers and also foreign newcomers need to have such experience. And then after her visit, she began to help. She tried to introduce this method of water birth in New Zealand in her center. and there were a number of successful letters there. She also visited some TV programs with Tchaikovsky, and she participated in a whole child birth in Moscow, and she had this video with daughter birth, which she had with birth. And yes, I have a little time, so I just want to show you some more photos. Those are also well-known images and ambassadors of Stalin, Alma and General John Key. And Alma Kid was also a follower of Indian guru Sri Swami Shivananda, and in this status she was very interested with Igor Tchaikovsky ideas. And then another interesting figure, Linda Tellington Jones, author of the method of Tellington Touch, system of animal training and healing and human animal communication. She visited Soviet Union several times in 1984 and 1986 and met with Tchaikovsky and a Healthy Family Club. Another New Ager, Sandra Rain. She is a midwife and promoter of home birth, and she was a Babaji devotee, and also books of child healing, spiritual healing, and spiritual development. And Vladimir Bagriansky remembered that she gave him a lot of her own books, esoteric literature. All books she had with her at the moment. And later she wrote a book, Ideal Birth, where she wrote about Tchaikovsky's experiments, and this book was translated by Tchaikovsky's scholars and published in samizdat of this movement. And then this slide is dedicated to French New Age journalist Patrice Van Hersey, who is now one of the closest friends of Tchaikovsky's followers, Vladimir Bagriansky, who lived for many years in France. And there the publications about Tchaikovsky, his water babies and water births in French, his book and his paper. So some are my conclusions. We see that there are many things which are common for late Soviet esotericism, esoterics and Western New Ages, the ideas like childbirth utopia and the idea of children of the age, that's children's messianism, psychic children, indigo children, and so on. The New Age dolphinist myth and the idea of dolphin communication and parallelist belief in the parallel dolphinist civilization, that they are more intelligent than people. And belief in paranormal powers and the possibility to rise as Superman. And I have no time, but it is also a main part of this teaching was transpersonal psychology, parental matrices for stem cell growth, but also there are a lot of differences and misunderstanding and distinction between these two esoteric milieux. First of all, we must say that in Soviet New Age, so-called Soviet esotericism, there in I speak only about this subculture of milieu, of these follows of Tchaikovsky and this movement for babies' dolphins. There was no idea of spiritual growth and personal transformation. They only want to raise their children as superhuman beings, human dolphins, but there was no idea for parents themselves to change them. They believe that these children will change the world and the society and so on. And it is interesting words of Michael Murphy in his interview to Ekaterina Belosova about when she asked him about this movement of Tchaikovsky's scholars. He said that the development of human inner abilities is something that an adult, a grown-up person should cultivate within himself rather than imposing these rigid shifts on youngsters. So she was against these experiments with the children, and also Tchaikovsky's rigid methods don't find understanding in Western media community in late 80s and early 90s when he began to travel, and his first visit was to Pinhorn Foundation, where he gave lectures, but his demonstrations they were perceived unaccessible as violence against babies. Then yes, it is idea of violence for good, which was common and widespread among Russian spiritual practices. Then maybe some kind of materialistic or parascience concept of this paranormal phenomena. So they denied that there is some spiritual ground under this. Experiences, collectivistic logic, against this individualistic logic of Western ages, that he wants to breed and race, not an individual personal growth. So in 1990s, this Tchaikovsky's fame was decreased, and his methods were decided as unacceptable, mostly for this careless behavior, fanaticism, and violence. Well, I'm
Yeah, we can continue with